All right, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our August meeting. My name is Gary Bowers, and I am not Nancy. So if you remember, Nancy's last month was the prior because she is traveling right now. So next month we will have our new president taking over. Mark, there he is. So that'll be next month. Okay. We are going to go through this. We have a new little clicker, so hopefully everything will go smoothly as I say that, and it doesn't. Aha, there we go. All right, so coming up September, we've got Ricky Lennox, who's going to be talking about the grasses of Central Texas. Then October 9th, we've got Lori Dixon, and I might be able to do this. Oh yeah, there we go. October 9th, so we got Lori Dixon. Then November 13th, John Hart Asher. So we'll be talking about pocket prairies. And December 11th is our annual holiday party. So notice that our upcoming events are all here at the Georgetown Public Library. So you don't have to worry about any location changes. And then if you have any input on speakers that you'd like to see coming up for next year, go ahead and send Susie Hickman a note about that. Susie, how's our next year looking now? Okay. All right. So still some spaces available? Okay. All right. Upcoming field trips, August 24th, which is 10 days from now, Godwin Preserve Plant Survey. And then September 12th, grass identification and field trip with Ricky Lennox. So that's in conjunction with the talk that he's going to be giving. Looks like the time is going to be TBD. We've got one coming up at Berry Springs in October, then back to the Godwin Preserve for another plant survey on November 15th, and then Gary Park, November 30th. So this is about the landfill, and this is actually coming up this Sunday. So if you'd like to come out and pull Johnson grass, Bermuda grass, what else have we been pulling out there? Cassandra, mostly Johnson grass. There's a fallow field that stood beside of us, so we've gotten a lot of Johnson grass this year. But we've been seeing the plants that have been doing super well are the Pavonias. Those have been doing really good out there. I went by earlier this week and they did remove the bridge. The little bridge was getting a little rickety when we were out there. So they did go ahead and take that out. That was waste management. So new membership co-chairs. And then when I call your name, if you'll stand up so that we know who you are, if you're here. Marilyn Kirkus, who you probably have already met as you came in the door. And then Natalie, I'm going to butcher her last name. Is it Rog or Rogue? Is Natalie here? Not here. Okay. So those are our new membership co-chairs. So thank you for stepping in tonight, Marilyn. I know officially your duties weren't going to start until September, but here you are, a month early. So the spring 2025 Wilco native plant sale was a good success, great success actually. So the financial analysis is here. We have, we'll get it. So gross sales, I'm going to use this all day. $1,880. These were our expenses. So we had a net profit of around 51%. Okay. So thank you for everybody that made the plant sale a success. Beth Irwin, our plant chair, and then all the other folks down here, myself, Aaron, Randy, Nancy, all kind of help out on the plant sale committee. So thank you, everybody. This is our main way that we raise funds. So that's why this is super important for us.
Yeah, you to sign up.
Yes, so we're gonna do it again in the fall. And that actually might be my next slide. So, good segue. October 11th from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., back at Southwest Williamson County Regional Park. The details will be on the blog. I know there's a little bit there already. I think we've got a preliminary plant list that's out there. So keep up with that. That's nipsotwilco.org if you're not familiar with that. That's primarily where we'll have all the announcements. Summary for our field trip that was down at the Meadows Center for Water and Environment in San Marcos, which I was actually able to make it to, so that was a good one. So we did a guided boat tour, and I learned that I do get a little bit of vertigo if I'm looking through the glass bottom boat and the boat is moving. That wore off really quickly though, so if you've not done a glass bottom boat, don't let that hold you back because it may not last. So we got to see a ton of stuff. Lots of plants. There was a lot of talk. Casey gave us lots of information about the aquatic plants and the things that they've been doing there. All right. And for those of you that are in person tonight, we have some free plants in the back. We have got standing cypress, which is there on the left. This is a biennial. What does a biennial mean, class? Biennial means that it will have a rosette for, I'm not going to say a year. It'll start as a rosette, and then the next spurt of growing season is when it will bloom. In mine, this is usually more like it does this either in the spring or the fall. I have them do both, and then it sprouts up. But every once in a while, like this one, you'll get a yellow one instead of a red one. So tons of fun. And then we'll also have narrow-leaf coneflower, so echinacea angustifolia. This one preferred over the purple one that you often get at the garden supply centers. This is more drought tolerant. So low water, part shade, April through July. Really lovely, smaller. The leaves aren't as wide as that other purple one. Hence narrow leaf. And tonight, an attendee will be receiving this book, Blue Stem Grasses in Texas. This is the book that was recommended maybe by our guest speaker tonight. So that's another reason why you want to come in person, so that you can get the plants and you can get the book. So make sure you got a ticket if you didn't get a ticket, get that before we do the drawing at the end of the meeting. Tons of information about where you can find us. So do we have any new people here tonight who haven't been with us before? Oh, okay. So just a few new folks. Here are all of the places where you can find us, in addition to our website, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. And then always take note of when the meetings are going to happen and where, because sometimes we do have to shift our location a little bit. So next, I'd like to introduce our speaker, which is going to be Dr. Megan Clayton. Sorry, too many things in my hands here. So since 2010, Dr. Clayton has been an Extension Rangeland Specialist for Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service and the Department of Rangeland, Wildlife, and Fisheries Management at Texas A&M. Responsibilities as a rangeland specialist have her based at the Uvalde Research and Extension Center and include providing support for extension agents, specialists, clientele, and organizations through teaching, training, and providing technical expertise on the management of rangeland resources. So welcome, Dr. Clayton.
All right. Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out. I'm very excited to be here tonight. And hopefully I have slides, or else I'm just going to wing this for the next 50 minutes or whatever we've got. Perfect. Okay, very fancy clicker, so bear with me on that one. I am Megan Clayton. I know that I've seen many of you in several places across the state, whether at a Texas Master Naturalist meeting or online with Plant Party, which we'll talk about here at the end of this event. But today I was asked to talk about something related to native plants, and we're covering selecting, purchasing, and planting natives. And I feel a little bit like I am preaching to the choir. So some of you, this will be a complete general overview of things you already know. And some of you, hopefully that are a little bit newer will be super inspired about planting natives and why we might want to do that. So basically, I'm going to go through native plant establishment, and then we're also going to cover a little bit about how to position yourself when you graze plants. Does anyone here have livestock? Okay, a couple of you. So we know that the native prairies have evolved with grazing animals, and there's some certain principles that I just want to touch on for everyone's knowledge, because it's very important to understand that though they were adapted for grazing, there's some key principles that we want to follow anytime that we're grazing our native plants. So why natives? Obviously, if you came tonight or if you're online tonight, we know that you love natives. Out in the other part of the world, the people who are doing all kinds of different things, they have many different reasons for why they might consider putting natives in the ground. One is just to increase their plant diversity. We know that as humans, we are not as patient as we should be. So sometimes ecologically, they would catch up and we would have a diverse plant community. But sometimes maybe we have bare ground, or we like to hold the soil better, or we want to add a little bit more diversity right away. We might put some seeds down, sprinkle them in with whatever's already existing there. Sometimes we know that we have invasive plants that are there, and we would like to try to keep them out as much as possible. The best way to do that is to keep our soil covered. And so we want to get those plants in there and get them germinating as fast as possible after we remove all of the invasive plants. And so that's one strategy for replanting to keep the non-invasives out. We also know that natives are fantastic because they benefit livestock, wildlife, and of course, all of our pollinator species. We know that natives are beneficial because oftentimes in our plant community, we have something that's green for livestock or wildlife all throughout the year. And that's a major benefit over a lot of our introduced pastures. As you've noticed, as you drive across the highways, there's pastures that are beautiful and green. The next time you go by, they might be fairly brown. So they tend to kind of have their cycles during the year, and everything's doing the same thing when it's a monoculture or one planted grass. So why would someone plant? Well, they need more seed bank. They feel like their vegetation's responding very slowly. We're seeing that right now. I'm getting some calls about this because we had, 2 or 3 years of a very tough drought. And we lost some of our more beneficial plants, especially if they did not go into that drought in good condition with healthy roots. And then once we received rainfall, I think people were expecting everything to come back like gangbusters and it to be this beautiful native mix. And that doesn't always happen right away. What types of plants come up first? Weeds, right? So people are freaking out. Like, I've got a lot of weeds, and I'm like, that's beautiful because that is ecological succession. So if you wait, your other plants will hopefully also be waiting in the soil to come back to join them as well. So a lot of benefits to having patience with natives, but if not, you could always speed that recovery by planting some seeds and encouraging them to grow. We know that we could improve our plant diversity, our structure, how that plant community looks on our landscape to the wildlife or the livestock that utilize that place. And then of course, just for natural landscaping, because I think they're beautiful. This picture right here is back when the Eagle Ford Shell in South Texas was going hot and heavy. Y'all remember those times? This is at night. Those are all the flares. It's great. Those are all the flares from the oil and gas activity that was going on in the area. A lot of those pipelines and pads that went in, they are being replanted in natives, thankfully. So we're really trying to encourage people to think ahead when they have contracts and try to get people to insist that natives go back in instead of the introduced grass species. Do you have a valid question? We'll talk about that later. That's a good question. We have my daughter Paisley with us today. She is a first grader and very inquisitive, so bear with us. We're going to talk about selecting native seeds, and that's really fun. Trying to figure out what you could add to your seed bank, I think, is one of the fun things about planting natives. There's a few places that I would send you, especially if y'all are working on projects where you might not be as familiar with that property. First, of course, we're going to determine our soil type, and we can do that in a couple ways. We could either send off a soil sample to be analyzed. Sometimes that's helpful. Natives, we don't actually fertilize because we'll be doing a couple of things potentially. One, we're putting very expensive fertilizer down that may not actually gain the boost from the fertilizer that some of our introduced plants do. Also, we just talked about what a beautiful thing it is for native plant communities to be in a diverse plant group. And if we put fertilizer on, we may be favoring one or two species over the others. And so that's why we don't see a lot of fertilization going on in native lands. But sometimes when you're going to replant a place, especially if it was previously farmed, they also farmed out a lot of the nutrients. And so we may want to consider putting some sort of fertilizers down just for that initial establishment. And after that, the native plants should do well on their own. Also, we could go to Web Soil Survey. Has everyone used Web Soil Survey? Okay, good. So if you haven't, it is a must-do for someone that loves native plant communities. I'm going to nerd out on you just a little bit tonight because Web Soil Survey is a free resource online from USDA NRCS that tells you more information than you ever wanted to know about your soils and the plants that will grow on those soils. And then, of course, we'll talk about what plants would grow best and how to find that list of plants that you could start to pull from to add into your plant communities. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Texas Native Seed Project. If you're not familiar, it's a project with Cesar Kleberg Wildlife Research Institute at Texas A&M Kingsville. This group does not sell native seed. They actually develop seed for commercial use. So a commercial producer might get those seed from them and then start to produce it to sell to you, but they don't sell direct to people. They're in the business of research. Please put down your hand. Thank you. These are the different regions in Texas where they have someone stationed to specifically grow or develop seeds that are adapted for that region. I think that's very exciting because they started out as South Texas natives and we're only focused on the South Texas region. So lots of good coming from them. The favorite thing with this group is that they have a seed selector tool. And I know some of the native seed companies do as well now, but this one is a little bit more unbiased because they're talking about work they do with several different seed companies in the state. So all you would do is go to Google and type in Texas Native Seed Selector Tool. And then it's going to pull up the whole state and you'll click on the region that you're in. I think, yeah, my example is for Uvalde County, so I apologize. That's where my research center is. But I clicked on South Texas and then I clicked on Uvalde County. And you'll notice that Uvalde County has two different types of ecoregions going on. They've kind of got the South Texas brush country and the Edwards Plateau. So you would select which region you feel like that land is in. And then you can see it's very simple. You're either sandy or you're clayey. So kind of simplistic. So are you more sandy or more clay? I know we have the loam in between, but usually you can kind of figure out or see when you wet the soil, if you can actually feel the particles, then you're probably what? Sand, right? So because we've all felt the sand particles, it's very smooth. You're probably a little bit more on the clay side. So you choose one of those and it literally just pops out a PDF that you can download that has not just what seed varieties would do well in your area, but the specific ecotype or variety that's meant for your region. And that's the important part, right? We're not planting little blue stem. We're planting the little blue stem that's adapted to your region. So that's what I love about this list. I also promote, just like them, that you would do 100% grasses if you're doing a new planting, and then put the forbs on top of that. Because our native grasses grow more like as bunch grasses, and there's always interspaces in there that our forbs can fill in with, but it's best if we plant 100% grass to get that soil held well, so we're not losing any of our topsoil, and then allow those forbs to kind of do their thing in the interspaces. At the bottom of each of these PDFs, it also has a list of seed vendors that corresponds to the numbers by those seeds. So you can kind of see who mostly is carrying the seeds that they say are best for your type of soil. And then at the very bottom, it also has the Texas native seed contact for your region if you're wanting to contact them and ask them any questions about their seed list. All right, so the other place that you could get some of this information is Web Soil Survey. Web Soil Survey also has a app tool that's called Soil Web. That's where it's a public resource. So the UC Davis California California Soil Lab took their information and made Soil Web, and it uses the GPS in your phone or tablet to tell you approximately what soils you're standing on. So that's kind of cool if you're out on a field trip or something and you just want to pull it up and get an idea of if there's similar soils to your area or not. I prefer, if you're getting to dive deep to get a lot of information, I really like to go to the website like on a computer. And maybe I'm just old school, but it's easier for me to find a lot of the information that's back behind all of the soil maps. So Web Soil Survey, you just literally go to Google, type in Web Soil Survey, it'll pop up. You would click that big green button that says Start Web Soil Survey, or if you forget everything I say, oh, look at that. Right down here is 4 basic steps to developing your own soil map for that property. All right, so there is the area of interest. Where are we here? Whoa, okay. There's your area of interest tab. That's where you would put in your address or your town and navigate to your area that you want to delineate. You just click around it, and here's the key. Then double click, and it's going to put blue lines through your area. The next tab over is soil map. That's going to show you a map of your soils and have a key to where you can match up what soils are what. Put your hand down. Over here, the next tab over is called Soil Data Explorer. Oh, I'm really not. Okay, there we go. Dun, dun, dun. Yeah, wait a second. Soil Data Explorer. And on Soil Data Explorer, they have an ecological site description button. Click on ecological sites, and it's going to take you to NRCS's other behind the scenes information called Edit. And it's really kind of handy because it tells you your ecological site. And if you're not familiar with ecological sites, it's just a way where you might have a bunch of little different soil types, but when you clump them all together based on what plant communities are there and the different climate that it has, they're probably more similar than not, right? So it kind of is a little bit more general than your individual soil types that it's going to list. So you can see this land was broken down into major ecological sites. It's going to give you a list. So I would look through here and say, okay, 14% was this eastern clay loam, mostly this Clairville, eastern clay loam. So I'd click on that, and I could actually go into Web Soil Survey's edit program, and it's going to give me information, but I am a person that likes all my data to myself. I want to download it and save it. And so if you go to the bottom, you can download the full description there at the very bottom. And you're just downloading a PDF that's going to tell you, oh my gosh, so much cool stuff, where that ecological site exists in the state. It's going to talk about how those plant communities change depending on disturbances that are put on it, either natural disturbances or man-made, like a prescribed fire, brush control, how it would change that plant community. And it's going to talk about the history, the animals that have been on that place, really fascinating stuff. And at the very end, it's going to give you a list of plants that should be growing in that ecological site. So you can see you've got mid grasses, short grasses, cool season grasses, forbs, shrubs, vines. Oops, 1, 2, that was it. Shrubs and vines. I guess there are no trees on this site. That information is helpful to me because, one, before I even go out to a place, I can look it up on Web Soil Survey and I know a lot about it before I get there. And then when I get there and I notice certain plants are missing that are kind of key species to me, that tells me that something has been done in the past with the management that has changed that plant community somewhat. And that might be a candidate for reseeding or maybe replanting some of these shrubs or trees to improve the structure of that plant community over what it is right now. And then there's your soil web. It's the smartphone app or the tablet app. And then if you use Google Earth, if you're a Google Earth fan, they have an overlay for Google Earth that you can download off that California Soil Resource Lab site. All right, so about natives. When we purchase native seed, so when we actually buy natives, we're not getting all good seed. Y'all knew that, right? You're all very smart. Okay. Seriously, I feel like I'm speaking to the wrong group on this, but when you pull out a handful of seed, there is a certain portion of this seed that is hopefully not weed seed. There's always a little weed, but this also has seed that is absolutely the right plant, but it's just not viable to germinate for one reason or another. And so that seed is kind of taken out of the equation when we plant. And so they have to test all the seed before it's sold. And it's going to have a PLS, the pure live seed, which is viable and will germinate, percentage on your tag. So when we buy, we don't buy a pound of seed because that's what we bought 5 years ago. We buy based on the PLS of that specific seed harvest. And so it might vary each time you purchase how much actual seed you're purchasing because it should be based on the PLS standpoint. Even if you plan to buy a pound of seed, no matter what the PLS is, it's important to know because you wouldn't want to buy seed that is not very viable. So then you think it's just not planted correctly, or you must have done something wrong, or maybe you overwatered it, or maybe birds ate all your seed, when in fact it maybe was not that high of a PLS to start out with. Also on the seed tags, it'll have dormancy. And sometimes people shy away from buying seed that has dormancy in it. So say you had 15% dormancy. I kind of like that because native seed does not always come up right away, as we've probably all experienced when we would like for it to come up right away. That dormancy is saying, hey, if we don't get good rainfall and things don't go well this fall as we're expecting, then maybe it'll come up next year because it's going to sit dormant before it's going to be viable. So that doesn't mean that it's dormant and it's never going to come up. It's just a delayed thing. Like we saw on that PDF you could download off the seed selector tool site, we know that there are different varieties, and those different varieties are very important. A lot of times people will try to get a certain plant seed and they're out. And so the company may suggest a different substitute for that. And it may be better to get a different plant entirely that's actually adapted for your region than to try to chance it with something that's not the right variety for your region. I hope that makes sense. But sometimes we go in thinking we're going to get X, Y, and Z, and we might get X, Y, and A, and that actually may end up being a better planting for us than what we even originally thought. The Texas Department of Agriculture has seed tags that include the origin of the seed. And of course, the origin is not where that seed company is or even where the plots are where that seed is grown. It's from the parent seed. And so we want to make sure that the parent seed, the origin of where that initial plant was that they collected and made propagated for this seed planting, we want to make sure that was within so many miles of the location of where you're planning to plant it for good. And then, of course, native seeds have come a long way in the last decade or so, but still there's a short supply. So if you're planning to plant in the spring, I would start putting in your orders ahead of time to make sure that you have some reserved for you if you have very specific needs for your site. So I don't like to give a list of seed companies because I will inevitably leave someone out. But on the flip side, I also hate sitting through a presentation and them never saying where they would suggest me find the seed that they so talked about. So here's a list of things that places that I think highly of that have a lot of fantastic seeds for our state. Douglas King Seed is right there in San Antonio near where I live. They carry seeds from all regions of Texas, including the certified seed that's come out of the Texas Native Seed Program. Native American Seed right there in Junction, but now they have a warehouse. I don't know if y'all knew that. They opened that warehouse there in New Braunfels Makes it way more convenient for picking up your seed if you need to do that rather than go to Junction. They concentrate on seeds that are native to our bioregion. Bamert seed is out in Muleshoe, but they still carry seeds for Northeast and West, so many seeds that would overlap with your area. Turner Seed Company also carries Northeast and West seeds. They're out of Breckenridge. And then the Roundstone Native Seed Company, unless you have land in the east, you probably will never need them. But they actually carry a lot of seeds out in Kentucky that do well in our East Texas region because we don't have too many people specializing in East Texas plants right now. So make sure you plant a mix because we're trying to get a native plant community established and they all kind of play off of each other for their strengths and weaknesses to create a good cover on our soil throughout the year. Sometimes people only want to plant grasses, and most often that's because they're either only interested in cattle grazing, or number two, they want to be able to control the weed seeds that they're having a lot of trouble with on their land. In that way, they would be able to put out a product like 2,4-D, an herbicide that is specialized towards broadleaf weeds and not going to hurt the grass, at least once that grass gets 5 or 6 true leaves on it. So that's why some people may consider doing only grasses, but like we talked about, those inner spaces are going to be bare. And so it's very important to me that we also consider putting forbs into the mix. It's kind of a misconception that our cows don't eat forbs. They actually eat quite a bit of forbs. They love them. But if you think about the size of a cow's body versus the size of a deer body, a cow is going to eat more forbs in a day than a deer would in most circumstances. So most definitely, I always encourage landowners, no matter what their goals, to consider putting a mix into the ground. We also always want to talk about getting early, mid, and late successional species. And when we made an online course, we realized there's not really a good go-to resource to tell you which seeds are early, mid, and late successional species for different regions of Texas, because it can vary depending on where we are. So that is one of the publications that we made that I was very proud of because it's very simplistic, but really good information. The reason you want that is just kind of like when you're growing up, you kind of go through the weird teenager stage, and then, sorry if there's any teenagers in the room, but you go through a weird teenager stage, and then everything kind of comes together at the end. Same deal with seeds. You want those early successional species to be taking hold of the ground. A lot of times in this area, I'll see things like silver bluestem tends to come up pretty fast. A lot of our forbs, of course, could come up pretty fast, but something to hold the soil just so that those other plants can get established later. Once you buy your seeds, they can either mix them for you or you can mix them yourself. And we'll talk about different ways to plant, but that's going to kind of determine how you want your seeds mixed. So Paisley, would you take these down and let people see them? We have hard seeds in one bag and fluffy seeds in the other. You'll notice that some of the hard seeds are blue. Do y'all know which seed is blue in Texas? It's actually a talc powder they put over a fluffy seed. So sometimes you'll see that. A blue seed usually means it's got talc powder over it. That's taking a fluffy seed and making it hard enough to go out with the hard seeds. Our native seed drills are made in such a way that they have separate boxes so that we can put out fluffy seeds and hard seeds and get them calibrated appropriately. So let's pretend I was going to put it out with like a fertilizer spreader just by hand. If I had fluffy and hard seeds in the same mix, what's going to happen? All that fluffy seeds are going to kind of shake out to the top, right? So I'm mostly putting out hard seeds, and then I'll put out fluffy seeds at the end. And we've all seen fields like that, right? There's a whole lot of one species in one area. It's probably what happened is it just didn't get calibrated appropriately. So really important that we think about how we're going to put them out and if it's necessary to separate them or not. By the way, I've heard a lot of creative things about putting out them together, maybe putting kitty litter in with it or some kind of compound that's going to keep those seeds separated a bit so that they'll go out a little bit more easily and more evenly. Once you get your seeds home, if you don't get them out right away, you want to make sure you put them in a cool, dry place, of course, pest-free, where you're not having all your expensive seed eaten up. If it's stored for more than a year, you may want to consider retesting the seed. And oftentimes we'd like for you to go back to the seed dealer and use the same lab that they used before. Thank you, darling. And then be sure that if you're going to include a cover crop, know why you're going to include a cover crop. So a cover crop would be something like a brown top millet, a wheat, or an oat. Those would go out if you're planting out of season, which I normally don't suggest. But if you plant out of season and you get some good green coming up and everything else around it is brown, what's going to happen? All the wildlife in the whole county are going to flock to your new planting. So that's why we like to plant when we get plenty of rainfall and lots of elses growing. But if you're not, you might consider putting some sort of other seed in with it that wouldn't be too competitive. It's going to kind of die out, but would help hold the soil and also eliminate the need for something to eat all of your seeds that are there in the soil. All right, so when we prepare the ground, we know it's not like a garden bed. That's one of the bigger misconceptions. People often do lots of fluffy tilling, and they even like to kind of put it, they're like, how many rows should I make? Like 0 rows. Let that puppy get a good rainfall and get hard to where you could walk through it barefoot or with flip-flops and not get dirt in between your toes. So you want it fairly hard, but not compacted. So we don't really advocate running anything over it that's going to compact the soil. We want it to stay fluffy for good seed to soil contact, which is the whole key to getting a native seed to grow. So when you plant it by hand, what do? Like toss and stomp. Or get some kids out there to help you toss and stomp, because tossing and stomping, you're just getting that good seed to soil contact, and that's all you need. So nothing fancy as far as getting it to there, but you want to make sure that your seed bed is such that it's going to hold that seed on the top of the soil and not allow it to get buried very deep. So when we plant the seeds, we're usually talking about 1/4 of an inch deep, or I've heard no more than twice the width of a seed. Some of these seeds are tiny, y'all. So just thinking about that gives my type A brain a lot of anxiety. We don't want them to get deep into the ground like you would plant a corn seed. They don't have that much energy in them to come up that far from deep in the soil. We know that we want it to be possibly, if it's flat ground with good soils, you may want to do some sort of cultivation if you're starting over. That will help to pull some of those plants out of the soil and dry out their roots further, and then allow rainfall or something to settle the soil before you go in and plant. So preparation tips. Obviously, make sure it's a good site to reseed. If it's not a good site, there are ways to work around it, but it might be quite a bit more expensive. So it's nice to know when you're going into the project that you might have some hurdles to overcome. If it's rocky, steep, very sandy, or erosion prone, you may need to do some extra practices ahead of time to make sure that your seeding works well. Know your goals for the site. You'd be surprised how many times people just want to restore natives. Well, that is great, but we need to know why we want to restore natives and what the use of the place is going to be to make sure that we're planting the right plants there that are going to be attractive and desired long term. Because sometimes we have some native plants that may get too tall, or they may take over too much of the space, or they may need more sun than what's in the site. And it's important to know that going into the whole project. Know your noxious plants beforehand. What's a noxious plant that y'all deal with? I heard Johnson grass earlier. Oh, KR blue stem. I should have talked about that one. It's a terrible plant. It's a terrible plant. KR blue stem is a great example. If there is no KR blue stem in your field because you've been diligent to get it out over the years, but it's in the neighbors, that's a problem, right? Because we know that once there's some bare ground, those seeds could blow in and take advantage of that bare ground very quickly. So we might consider leaving a brushy edge on that side, or defending some sort of road that we make just by disking an area that we can keep clear of KR blue stem before it gets into our pastures. So knowing ahead of time what you're up against really helps as far as spot spraying any new recruits that you happen to see coming in, but being prepared for them so that your seeds have the best chance possible. And of course, if you have unwanted brush in the site, you'll probably want to take care of that first. If we do a stem spray or a leaf spray application on brush, that plant has to remain there for 1 full year before you can remove it. So you might want to think about doing a cut stump application or grubbing it out if you're not going to disturb the soil too much around that area. So brush sort of adds another layer of decisions if you're trying to remove that before you do your planting. So herbicide applications, when we start to put them out, a lot of times, especially if people have something like King Ranch Blue Stem present, they might think about doing herbicide application that's kind of a broad spectrum to get rid of the things that are growing there presently so they could put in the plant mix that they want. I can tell you from my experience that that specific grass is not going to necessarily die with even a restoration rate of glyphosate on it. And so you might need repeated applications as well as some sort of cultivation like disking to help pull that plant up. We're working right now on research with summer burning and hoping that we can get around using herbicides as heavily by doing some summer burning to suppress King Ranch Blue Stem and allow our natives to do well in the fall. So we're trying to do repetitive burns in the summer for a couple of years before we plant our natives. So that's a very long project to think about, but may be more efficient than doing the herbicide applications to speed up the process. If it's not erosion-prone soils, cultivation's great, which I just talked about. Don't forget your nearby areas. That's probably the biggest problem that we see from people is that they clean up their seed bed beautifully, but they've got either the roadway right in front or a neighbor who has some plants that are not so desirable that tend to move in and kind of wreck their project halfway through. Remember that pre-emergent herbicides, while it's tempting to kill some of the unwanted seeds in our soil, a lot of times those are still good for 18 months up to 2 years. And so if you're trying to plant within the next 18 months or 2 years, do not use a pre-emergent because that could not allow your seeds that you plant to come up and be a major bummer. When you're planting, they always say plant when you're expecting moisture, which we don't know when we're expecting moisture. But for the most part, we know we could get some fall rains. We know that sometimes we get spring rains. That's sort of what we go for in this area. When we plant, we have 3 main options. The native seed drill, some sort of broadcasting method, or a hydro seeder. The native seed drill is interesting because it's different than a normal seed drill. So it has multiple boxes so that it can handle those fluffy and hard seeds. The broadcast seeding I've seen do just as well as a native seeder. So it is possible to get a hold of a native seed drill, but the broadcast, if that's the method that's easiest for you to get to, is also very effective from the research that we've done. Hydro seeders are where you've seen maybe on the side of the highway where they kind of spray like a blue or a green color. Those are hydro seeding. What they've done is they've mixed their seed in a slurry with mulch and then they spray it on there. So it holds your seed and it's watering it. So best case scenario, but very expensive. So that's something that we only limit to highly erodible areas because then the cost may actually make sense, whereas most of the time, not so much. You also need access to a large quantity of water. If you can imagine, that's going to be a lot of water that they've got to mix in there and then keep reloading during the day to keep seeding. So that's the last choice, but for sure, viable option if you've got some place that's very, very erodible. So after planting, lots of patience, as you've all seen. Our natives are sometimes a hard sell, I feel like, because they go through odd stages and it just may not look like the intended end product, especially if we don't get the right rains at the right times. But eventually they will get there, just like the natural ecological successional processes get there to those final climax species, but it takes some time. Definitely think about deferring grazing for 1 to 3 years, fire for at least 2 years, and allow those plants to get really good root systems established before you do anything that's going to set them back. We'll talk a little bit about why in just a second. So maintaining those plots can be really difficult. I heard y'all are going to dig up Johnson grass, which is quite a feat because Johnson grass can put down some pretty gnarly roots. Maybe you need a cow just to walk the cow through that area, because if someone calls me with a Johnson grass problem, my first thing is, do you have livestock? And it's usually no. Because you'll notice in most places, pastures don't have Johnson grass because cattle relish it. It's found in the ditches where the cows can't get to it. They can only longingly look through the wires at the Johnson grass out there. But once you start getting some things you don't want, of course, you can pull it up or consider spot spraying only with a glyphosate mixture. You wouldn't want to get glyphosate on anything else that's green. So I've seen a lot of creative setups where they place a bucket with no bottom to it over the plant, so the glyphosate only goes on that plant. Hold up cardboard on one side just to make sure, but note that anything you get it on is probably going to die as well. If a lot of your corner of your pasture comes back saying King Ranch blue stem, you may need to sacrifice that area and kill out that area just for the greater good of the rest of your pasture that you've planted, just because we know that that will continue to encroach across your pasture over time. Of course, if you only planted grasses, 2,4-D is an option like we talked about earlier, but you do have to make sure that your grasses are at least 6 inches tall and have true leaves on them. So it's kind of a misnomer to say that you can put out 2,4-D at any time on grasses, because they still need to be well established with good root systems. And then, of course, sometimes people call and they really, really, really want to shred the big forbs that are growing up in the pasture or the place that they planted. Anyone had that experience? You plant and then volunteer weeds come up and they're super tall. We see two scenarios with that. Sometimes the volunteer weeds are actually acting as nurse plants. And if you get out and you walk through the area, the planting, and you look underneath them, you'll actually see a lot of things germinating underneath the plant. So like the kind of conditions we're having right now, very harsh sunlight, they're actually shading out so those seeds are able to come up, and they've maintained a little bit of moisture underneath them. And then the other scenario, of course, that people are most used to is that those plants are shading out the ability for our seeds to germinate that we planted. And in that case, by all means, shred them off so the sunlight can get down to the seeds we planted and they can germinate. But always, always go out and kind of assess the situation and make sure that they're not actually being a tiny bit of a help for you in your planting. So for more information, we have Texas Native Seeds, a website. Of course, A&M has all of their publications and online courses at agrilife.learn.tamu.edu. Web soil survey is much easier just to type that into the Google box, but if you want the actual address, there it is. We did 7 reseeding videos in South Texas, and what's very beneficial is that we did some on like how to calibrate a native seed drill, something that you would not normally know how to do necessarily, and it's nice to see someone else do it. So those are very applicable for your region as well, but be warned, we are not actors. So if you're looking for a very exciting video, that's probably not it, but really good information in them. And then I'm really proud of a native seeding certification course that we put out about 2 years ago. That's with Texas Native Seed. It's on our AgriLife Learn website. I think it costs $100. There's 9 modules you can go through that's going to give you a whole lot more detail than I was able to do today. It also has a whole section on soils. It's taught by one of the soils professors at Texas A&M. It's really interesting. So that's available for you as well. So I want to just remind everyone, since we're talking about native prairies here, that ranchers utilize domestic livestock to market the forage that's produced on the range. So we own the property. And so my soapbox is that we are using cattle or sheep or goats or even wildlife to market the plants that we have on our place because we own the plants. So those should be our number one care, is taking care of the vegetation on the place. And remember that whatever livestock is there is dispensable. Oh, thank you, baby. They're dispensable. They could leave and we would still be left with our wonderful forage if we've cared for it correctly. So we know that when we're walking on a piece of property, there's certain things like thick brush that's obvious, right? When brush has encroached until it's not even very useful, either sunlight's not getting through and many of our plants are not germinating, or it has completely changed the plant community that should be there and be thriving. There's also some ways to look at how things have changed over time, and I think that could be really important for some of your projects. When we go on a thing like RAP, Rangeland Analysis Platform, totally free resource that is also fairly new on the internet, you can pick your cover type and look at different years and how that has changed over time. And it is so interesting to see how with the rainfalls, our different levels of perennial grasses and forbs have changed over time. And it even has a way to look, let me see if I have that picture. Yes, it'll give you the cover compared to the rainfall data, and then it will also give you your 16-day biomass. So in the past 16 days, based on satellite imagery, how much forage has grown throughout that time. So a lot of cool information that's telling us a lot about the health and the response of our prairies, depending on the climate conditions that we're experiencing, is on this rangeland analysis platform, or we lazily call it RAP. All right. Other things you can look for is soil capping. Soil capping is where we get the hard, crusty parts. Was anyone a weird child like me and you popped up a piece of soil? Okay, thank y'all very much for not leaving me hanging there. I would use a knife or a spoon and I could actually pop up a piece of soil. I had no idea that that meant there was not enough plants rooted in that area to keep that soil steady. So what's happened is the raindrops have hit the soil so hard that it's compacted it over time and there's no roots to break that up. So the next time we get rainfall, it's going to run off because we don't have any plants there to get it to soak into the ground. Erosion shelves and real erosions, those are pretty obvious things, hand down. Those are pretty obvious things that we don't have enough plant life to slow down the water, and it's probably taking our topsoil. The other thing is litter dams. I know you've at least seen a litter dam like in a shopping center area. There's nothing to stop the litter when it's sheeting across the land. When it finally hits something like rooted plants, it's going to create kind of a line of litter. So that little snake-like line of litter, not a good sign because everything before that should have had more plant life planted. And that may be a situation where you would consider going in and planting some seeds. The next one is, or the final one is pedestaled plants. Pedestal plants are where the soil has eroded away from the rooted plant life. My story for this one is I was at a place near Rio Grande City, way down south. This guy had pedestal plants everywhere. And he said, the good news is where I've got plants established, it's building back the soil. And in my head, I was like, oh no, like how am I going to tell this guy that no, you lost 4 inches of soil? And you're not going to see that come back for like 4 generations of people. So we're going to have to figure out how to hold what he has there and build back from that because it's not building back necessarily on its own. So pedestal plants or even a little bit of pedestaling is a sign that there's not enough plant life in that area to hold the water back when we finally get rainfall. So we all know this is a bad situation, obviously. I call it lizard licks. When the poop is higher than grass, that's never a good sign. But this is an obvious one, but we also have more subtle things like where we have a lot of bare ground, we have noxious weeds or invasive grasses coming in. That's another sign that there needs to be some more work done to get native plants established in that community so that it can be healthy long term. And what I really advocate for is thinking about carrying capacity or how long you can run animals on a piece of land without impacting the plant life that's there, because we know a little bit is good for them, but a lot of grazing, not necessarily. And I've seen a lot of scenarios where it's the deer or the wildlife that are doing most of the grazing. It's not necessarily our livestock friends. So running conservative stocking rates or thinking about how to fence off animals from critical areas like our riparian areas is a very good idea, because I think you'll see a natural response in our healthy, resilient native plant communities from doing such things. This is just a reminder. We're about to have a plant party focused on going into the dormant season, but we know that when we go into the fall, our plants start to slow down when we get cooler weather, but they're storing a lot of reserves, carbohydrates in those roots. And that's what's going to help them live throughout the winter and come back in the spring when there is no green material to do photosynthesis. Aren't our plants cool? It's crazy that they can come back with no green leaves. So that reserve is going to help them live until they do photosynthesis on their own with their new leaves they've built. So every stage is incredibly important for managing correctly. When we talk about taking some of our forage for livestock, we advocate only allocating 25% towards livestock, because we know that trampling and insects account for about 25% of that, and we want to leave half of that plant standing at all times. We can never get below half of the plant standing. That's the leaves standing. We know that leaving the stubble standing there does a million different things for our plant life, allowing them to come back the next season. But when we see some plants getting grazed over and over again, we know that those roots are shrinking at the same time. And the problem is when we get dry or conditions aren't so good, the first plants that die off were the more desirable plants for livestock and wildlife. So you're not just losing a few plants, you're losing your better plants every time we get in that situation. And that's going to start turning our plant communities into something that's not quite as valuable as what we started with. So we know that tall grasses, we want to leave at least 12 to 14 inches of the grass there. Mid grasses about 6 to 8 inches. And short grasses like our buffalo grass, 2 to 3 inches. Not yet, but thank you. And then we, couple final slides here. We know that when we get rainfall, in this case, we got about 17 inches and about 10 inches. It's going to respond pending how we left those plants before the rainfall. So in this case, we had 100 pounds per acre, we left 500 pounds per acre, and we left 1,500 pounds per acre. And you can see where we left 500 pounds per acre, we were able to grow twice as much forage that next growing season as the one that was only 100 with the same rainfall amounts. And then where we got even less rainfall, when we left 1,500 pounds per acre, we got as much or even more forage the next growing season. So my saying is you've got to have grass to get grass. And that 50% leaving of the leaf material, I always thought 50% was kind of a very clever round number. It's based on research. It's crazy. So in this case, this study showing when they removed 60% of the leaf matter instead of 50%, they actually lost, or 50% of the roots stopped growing. And when they took 80% of the leaf matter down, at that point, all of the roots stopped growing. So what we're doing above ground is directly affecting the roots below ground, which are supposed to be reaching all of our nutrients and all of our water that's hopefully reserved underneath there. So very important that we keep that 50% in mind at all times. So you do have to have grass to grow grass. We've got to maintain it on our properties. No, not yet. Okay, so I have a couple things to share with you real fast. One is Generation Next, Our Turn to Ranch. Just so happens that this online school is starting on August 25th, which is coming up pretty quick. This is for people who are new to land ownership or are inheriting land or want to add a new operation to their land. And it's a 12-week online course where we go through tax implications, insurance needs, basic land management, basic ag law, and how to set up a transition plan. And it ends with a business plan at the end of that 12 weeks. So that's available if y'all are interested. We still have a few seats left. And then Plant Party. How many of you have participated in Plant Party? Oh, how fun. Okay. Plant Party was meant to make plants fun. in some way, but it was originally intended directly for our agencies. So Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, USDA NRCS, and also Texas Parks and Wildlife Department. So we teamed up to provide advanced plant training for our employees, but we allow anyone to attend. Sit, yes, take that back, sit. Anyone can attend. We have a lot of Texas Master Naturalists, Texas Master Gardeners who attend. They're actually probably about 50% of our attendance. We have several hundred people online for each one of our webinars. And the next one's going to be September 17th, and it's really turning out to be a cool lineup of people. It's going to be on plant management before dormancy. So kind of like we were talking about having that reserve underneath the ground. And then December 10th, we're going to talk about identifying plants without leaves or flowers, because that is just killer hard. So what are you supposed to look like or look at if someone asks you, what is that grass, and it has no seed head? So anyway, check those out. This is the website for it, or you can probably just type in Plant Party Extension and it'll pop up. Do y'all have any questions for me? What was your question? How do seeds produce? They come off of the plant onto the ground. When do they come off the plant, people? They're different times of the year. That's right. Yes, that's what's beautiful, right? But as soon as they're ready, they fall to the ground and then they germinate when all of the stars align. That's what I call it. You have the right conditions, the right sunlight. Yes, ma'am. Oh, fantastic. That's right. That's right. That's a good question. She was asking why people tend to maybe just move them where there aren't fences with burning, so they're attracted to those areas, kind of like buffalo moved. Oftentimes they also will use water, turn on and off water on big ranches where they don't have fences. Or when you get over towards the east where we have smaller places, oftentimes they rely on hay as a backup, which we just had a whole session at our beef cattle short course about how to not feed hay, because when we feed hay, they're still eating the green things that are coming up in the pasture. So that's kind of a double whammy for our rangelands. The reason that they didn't has a lot to do with culture and misunderstanding of what grasses are there. And some of their grasses may be on different schedules, of course, than some of the grasses we see on the west up north. But we're seeing a slight trend and change because we have more technologies available. We have virtual fencing now, if anyone's seen that, very cool, where they can wear collars and they can lay out the virtual fencing without even having to stretch the hot wire. But hot wire and different types of hot wire are becoming incredibly popular now too. So I hope we start to see more of a movement towards living by the principles of leaving half of our better grazing grasses when we move out of that pasture and not returning until they're able to recover and have a good, strong root system. So you're right. Yes, ma'am. Yes, she was talking about, for those online, she was talking about natural fires, how they used to maintain the brush. When we have resprouting brush species, which is pretty much everything we have, unless we're lucky enough to have blueberry juniper, pretty much everything else is going to come back with a vengeance from the bud zone underneath the soil. They need to burn when they're only a year or two old, because after that, the growing point drops below the soil surface and a fire can't get hot enough to kill that plant. So it typically just suppresses it with the burns. But they did keep our prairie in check. And now we built houses and fences, and we don't care for those to burn. So we started suppressing them. And she mentioned that most of those natural fires that occurred were from lightning strikes. When do we have most of our thunderstorms? Spring, summer, right? When do we normally burn in Texas for a prescribed fire? Fall and winter. So a lot of times, like, we're a little off, and that's why I find the King Ranch bluestem studies where they did see some suppression of the King Ranch bluestem from summer burns very interesting, because that would sort of mimic when we would have a lot of our lightning strikes that might have started some of those fires. But winter burns are often a lot safer, maybe a little bit easier to manage. That's why that kind of became a trend. Any other questions? Were there some online?
Yeah, there's a related question online. Prescribed burn do you plant?
After a burn? So after a burn doesn't matter as much as burning after you plant, if that makes sense. So after you plant, you want to give them some time to get good roots established, but you could burn and plant even the next day. That would be completely okay. In fact, I would plant before you get a big response of vegetation back up, because that way your seeds have a little bit better chance of hitting soil, getting that soil, good seed to soil contact.
And there's one other question online. Can you talk a little about legumes?
They asked if I could talk about the most beneficial legumes. There's tons of them that may or may not be adapted for your area. So legumes have a bean on them. There's a lot of forbs that are very beneficial that people like to plant, but it's very important that you're planting something native to your area, because you're getting to the same issue picking something that's not going to germinate well for you and grow well in that area. Legumes are also used a lot of times as a type of cover crop, because they're going to add nitrogen back into your soil. So just like our native mesquite tree, that's a legume species. It has a bean on it. It does a lot of nitrogen fixation. So with that, the plant parts are actually quite charged with nitrogen. And when they go back into the soil, or they're eaten and defecated, that adds the nitrogen back into the soil. Hand down. Okay, hand down. Thank you. Are there any others online? Okay. Other questions? Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right, for those of you online, thanks so much for attending.